about some water-wise varieties today. So hopefully you see something you like. And by my watch, it's 2:05. So without further ado, if I can pass it off to my colleague Annie, we can get things started.
Hey, thanks so much for being here. We're really excited to be able to talk about some of our favorite garden design tips and tricks. My name's Annie Silverman. I'm a senior programs coordinator with Daily Axe. And Daily Axe is a holistic education nonprofit that takes a heart-centered approach to inspiring transformative actions that create connected, equitable, and climate-resilient communities. We believe in the power of our daily actions to reconnect people to self, community, and place, which helps heal our society and planet. Our holistic approach starts in the soil and swells into culture and policy change. Through over 100 talks, tours, and trainings a year, we implement 3 interwoven strategies for systems change. First, we spread solutions and models that offer the skills, tools, and resources to grow food, medicine, habitat, and community while conserving resources. Next, we strengthen community leadership by connecting leaders who understand the interrelations of social, economic, and environmental justice issues through networks and alliances. And lastly, we are working to build public and political will by mobilizing our community's power for environmental and climate justice policies. Our impacts ripple far and wide thanks to people like you all who take action in their daily lives. And we strongly believe that we can all, through our daily actions, be the change that we wish to see in the world. So I'd like to go over a couple of housekeeping questions, and then I'm going to pass it over to Connor. We have a Q&A here, and Liz, our colleague, is monitoring the Q&A, and she'll be answering questions in live time. And if there's any patterns or questions that she's not able to get to, she will then bring those up, and we'll have a live Q&A at the end of the webinar. We also have a chat function, which has now been turned so that all of your chats will go to Liz directly, and she'll be able to manage those. And if you have any resources that you'd like us to share out with everybody, please do drop those links in there, and we'll be sharing an email next week with all sorts of resources and follow-up. It makes it a little bit easier for Liz if you do direct your questions to the Q&A and keep your chat, or keep your comments and resources and things you'd like to share in that chat function. And you can see those both by hovering your mouse at the bottom of your computer screen, and you should see a chat icon and a Q&A icon. So we look forward to digging into this webinar, and I'm going to pass it to my colleague Connor.
Thanks, Annie. My name's Connor DeVane. I'm a programs coordinator with Daily Axe. I'm so grateful to all of you for joining us today, and I'm really excited for this webinar to give an overview of the gardening design process. Before we jump into the nitty-gritty and the fun details, we want to try out this poll function, which you should see pop up onto your screen right now. So this is an anonymous poll. If you want to tell us a little bit about your gardening experience or what brings you here today, I'll give you about a minute to fill out this poll. And if the poll's not working for you, feel free to enter your answers in the chat, or feel no pressure to participate. But we value your input, and we'd just like to get a sense of where everybody's coming from. Looks like most folks have voted. Just give it another 15 seconds or so. All right, so hopefully if the poll function is working the way we expected it to, you should be seeing the results now to see the distribution of our various contexts. It looks like everyone, or most of us, are here to learn something new, which is an awesome attitude to have. So with that, let's go ahead and get it started. And I'll send it back to Annie. Oh, you're on mute.
Shame on you. Whoops. I'd like to start off with one of my favorite design quotes that goes, if you're not in over your head, how do you know how tall you are? And that's because I myself find the design process to be kind of overwhelming, especially if you have an existing garden that you're looking to redesign. It's really hard to know where to start and how to get going. And so this webinar breaks down that whole process into 4 steps, observation being the first one, and then looking at your site factors, choosing plants, and going over some design examples for inspiration that can help break down the design process and make it a little bit less intimidating and a little easier to get started yourself.
All right, so the first thing that we're gonna need to do is figure out what it is that we want, right? We wanna get clear on our vision and our context. So when we get started, we wanna ask what it is that we want out of our landscape. Do we want a food forest or a native pollinator garden? Do we want a space for kids or pets to play in? You know, this is totally up to you. You know, let your imagination run wild. After that, you're going to need to determine what your needs are. What is it going to take to maintain this landscape that you're visioning? What are the materials that you're going to need? And of course, it's important to know where it is that you are. What's the context that you're designing in? Your climate, your growing zone, things of this nature, so that you can determine which plants make sense for you to have in your landscape. You also need to know your constraints in terms of how big is your site? Does it make sense for you to try to design a large food forest on 1/10 of an acre, for example? This is also a good chance to figure out what the ecology of your site wants. Maybe you have a hill that's eroding and the ecosystem wants deep-rooted plants that'll help check that erosion. Lots of things to consider here. And the last question is, what changes are you willing to make? What's already existing on your landscape that is going to stay? What are things you're open to removing or transforming? The sky is really the limit, and what you're willing to change really opens up the window for transformation. Of course, once you figure out where you're going, you need to make a mess.
Really taking a moment to pause and collect your thoughts and observe and be able to record them on some type of map helps you get started. I love this picture of a woman who seems to be just intently gazing into her garden, observing, trying to figure out what's going on. And this is the first section, to observe deeply, and that can help with the iterative process of garden design and helps you avoid unnecessary problems down the road. For example, knowing where shade in your garden falls throughout the seasons can really help you plant accordingly. And then lastly, observation helps you work with your landscape instead of working against it. Like knowing where any kind of perennial wet spots might be allows you to be able to plant plants that enjoy having wet roots instead of planting a fruit tree that might end up getting sort of drowned out and not producing the way you'd like it to. So what to include on your base map, this sketch, this capture of ideas, this kind of map that helps you figure out what you already have and where you'd like to go. Property lines are obviously important. You don't want to start taking over some of your neighbor's garden on accident. And then your house and other permanent structures, existing pathways, streets, and existing plants you'd like to keep, as well as I like to plan for residential landscapes, your windows and your doors, so you can have a really good idea of what your view into your garden is going to look like from your house. And even if you're really just planning a small space, like a raised garden bed, it's always a really great idea to write down what you would like to plant, what you have planted, and then that helps you be able to rotate your crops in your raised garden bed, which avoids pest issues. Really just never trust your memory when it comes down to planting and garden design. You might think that you are going to remember what you planted last year, but the next season rolls around and it's just like, poof, garden amnesia. So this really helps you keep track of where you're going, where you've been and where you're going, so that you can organize your thoughts and have a really healthy garden. So we recommend base maps. no matter the scale, whether it's a large landscape or whether it's just a smaller raised garden bed that you're hoping to design. There are a couple different options for making a base map. The tape measure and grid paper is what we've done for a long time. If you have an existing map of your property from your contractor or builder, that's a really great resource to start with. You can also use Google Earth Pro to get an aerial view of your property, which is this picture that we are using right here. That works really well when you don't have a lot of trees on your property, but as soon as you start getting canopy cover, you'll have a harder time seeing those property lines and any kind of features on your land. If you know somebody who has a drone, or a neighbor who has a drone, or an enthusiastic kid who wants to take some drone footage of your property, that could be a fun option. And then you can always go for a professional base map. Those can be a little bit pricier, but they'll get you down to centimeters of accuracy. And that's something that you might want to choose if you're going to hire out this work to a landscaper. This is a picture of a little more simple tape measure and graph paper base map that is helping this person get a sense of their existing structures, their pathways, and existing plants they'd like to keep. This can be a fun way of expressing your true artistic talent.
Okay, so real quick before we move forward, we're just going to run one more of these polls, which should be popping up on your screen now. So like everything we're talking about in this workshop, base maps have a wealth of information and detail that we could delve into. So once circumstances are different and we could have an in-person workshop with a more hands-on element, we'd love to know if you would join us for a base map workshop. Annie, I don't know if you want to say anything about base mapping workshops that we've had in the past.
Sure, yeah, I can see things are pretty split right now. We have held a 3-part workshop series in Petaluma, and the first of those workshops was building your own base map, and we went into about 2 hours of depth on building your base map. We went out into the living, learning landscape behind the Petaluma Library, and we practiced measuring out and then recording our information using a 1/4 inch and an 1/8 inch scale, and broke up into groups and just tried to base map out a plot of that garden bed. I think that was a really fun, hands-on way to become more comfortable with this concept at home. Obviously, it's really hard to do this kind of thing digitally, though.
All right, thank you, Annie, and thanks everyone for participating. Definitely keep your eyes and ears open for a workshop of that nature when circumstances allow. So if you've made a base map, you've definitely already exercised your powers of thoughtful observation a bit. But to me, observation is really the cornerstone of good design and even good management. And this quote here from Toby Hemingway, who's the author of Gaia's Garden, A Guide to Home-Scale Permaculture, really captures the guiding principle, I think, which is modeling after nature or after natural ecosystems. To me, if you're observing your landscape, seeing what the ecosystem is already doing on its own and using that as your model for the decisions that you make, you really can't go wrong. And so with that, you're going to want to start by observing patterns and then move to details. Some of these patterns are simple things that we're familiar with that I'm sure if you took a few moments to think about or just stepped out into your garden and looked for, you would find, spirals, nets, circles, waves, things like that. But this also includes patterns of a much bigger scale, like geologic, meteorological, even planetary. So patterns that are bigger than our sites, that cross through our sites, are often referred to as sectors. This includes things like sun direction and exposure, the way that rain falls and flows across your site, traffic, and even a way that a fire could burn through your site. So in this example, as you can see here, this person has taken their base map and done a sector analysis, and they're showing how winds change at different times of the year. They've tracked the difference of the arc of the sun from season to season. And here we have just a quick diagram showing the different trajectory of the sun. It's always good to know as you're plotting out where your plants are going, where the sun's going to be at different parts of the season. Typically, when people are designing in partnership with a sector analysis, they're going to perform what's called a zone analysis. This is often something that applies more to larger sites. Knowing that with zone 1, we're talking about what's just around your house, things like an herb garden, patio, sometimes a chicken coop, moving out to vegetable beds, cash crops, pasture, orchards, all the way to a zone 5 that would normally be an untouched or wild ecosystem that we can use for inspiration or to recreate in. But just because that's more applicable to a larger site, which many of us don't have access to, many folks, myself included, rent the places that we live and we inherit the structures of the gardens that we have, doesn't mean we can't apply those principles and those strategies to our own needs. So here on the right is a picture that I took just outside my door, one view of my garden, and really quickly drew up a kind of arbitrary zone analysis here, saying that zone 1 is kind of a recreational space where we can eat dinner. Zone 2 is maybe herb garden. Over here we have perennials and fruit trees, and zone 4 is more annual veggie production. So you get the idea here, right? You basically want to compartmentalize where the different groups of characteristics and functions of your garden. It'll help you with not only the design process, but the management of your garden as well. So once we have an idea of where we're going, we've made our map, we can look at what we have to work with and also what is getting in our way. So you see here in the top left, we have this pile of rocks that maybe we dug out from when we were making our garden beds. We've got a tendency to flood on our site, or we have large areas of shade that aren't conducive to growing certain plants, or maybe we have wildlife who have different ideas of what our garden should do than what we are designing for. I love the mindset that's often attributed to permaculture of taking obstacles and turning them into opportunities. There's a famous saying by Bill Mollison, who's often considered, he's a leading figure of the permaculture movement. He says that you don't have a slug problem, you have a duck deficiency. And so it's kind of exemplifying that. We've taken the rocks, we've made a barrier for our garden here. We've planted a shade garden underneath this redwood canopy. Maybe we're inviting wildlife into our garden, whether that's by planting habitat plants or by making an owl box, things of this nature. And then we fixed our flooding problem by creating a rain garden that catches the rainwater, slows its flow across the land, sinks it, spreads it, and nourishes all these very likely native plants in this rain garden. And while we're talking about harnessing water, I'm going to pass it back to Annie for a little more detail.
There are a bunch of really creative ways to be able to capture water on your site, to store it, and then use and reuse it. One of the ways are above ground water catchment systems, or barrels. And I first wanted to talk about this 55-gallon food grade recycled blue barrels as a do-it-yourself lower cost option. You can see in this picture to the left that water is coming off of a smaller structure and is being fed into these barrels that are then daisy chained together. So you have about a 220-gallon water storage capacity in this top left photo that's then attached to a garden hose that you're able to water your garden with. And then in this bottom right photo, it's a daily acts workshop that we held last year at Cherry Valley Elementary School, where we were able to install these blue barrel systems with Jessie Saveau, who is featured in this picture. And she is the owner of Blue Barrel Rain Catchment Systems. And she also co-hosted a webinar with us that's available on our website. And She is a fabulous resource. Her company webpage is a fabulous resource for how-tos, tutorials, resources, and a great place to order if you're interested in getting these blue barrel systems that are a fairly low-cost way of storing rain. And then we also have those larger tanks here. I think of this tank on the left as sort of the iconic, maybe a little less aesthetically pleasing, large gallon, 5,000 gallon rain tank storage. And then on the right, you can see these slimline tanks that we have at one of our City Hall landscapes in downtown Petaluma that are collecting rainwater from the roof and then feeding it into this rain garden. I really love this system because when the water from the roof overflows the capacity of these rain tanks, it goes into this rain garden that feeds plants that like to have a little bit wetter roots. And then these plants and the mulch purifies that water. So when it gets to the storm drain right here and out into the street, the water is a lot cleaner than when it fell and hit the roof. So this is a way of letting that water, first capturing what you can, and then letting the rest slowly sink into your landscape. And then what does get to the street is a lot less and a lot cleaner. These rain tank systems and letting water kind of slowly sink into your soil is also really great for your soil because it keeps it a little bit wetter. The nation that destroys its soil destroys itself, is what Franklin D. Roosevelt said. Soil is one of the most important components. It is your foundation for growing your garden. You can think of yourself as a soil farmer or a soil landscaper instead of really a plant farmer or a plant landscaper because it all starts with the soil. And the soil is a great carbon sink, which is something that Daily Axe is focusing more and more on as ways that you can capture atmospheric carbon and store it in your soil for supporting the planet and supporting yourself and supporting your plants. And then the healthier your soil is, the more it's able to store water, and the more it's able to store water, the healthier your plants will be. So you really think about creating healthy soil and creating healthy soil conditions is creating the pathway for a really, really healthy garden down the line. So part of creating really healthy soil starts with knowing what type of soil you have. And a lot of people in Sonoma County are probably looking at a mixture of clay, maybe hardpan clay, if you're living in some areas of Santa Rosa or Petaluma, or maybe a clay loam mixture. I live in Santa Rosa and have like 6 inches of loam before I hit a pretty dense clay. So this percolation test here can help you figure out what type of soil you have so you can A, be aware and plant plants that will thrive in that type of soil, and B, develop a plan towards amending it if you would like to have a little different soil characteristic. And we have resources on how to perform a percolation test, getting caught up on my words, on how to perform a percolation test on our website. So please do check out our resources on our website, and perhaps Liz can drop that link as well. And then another really great test that you can perform really quickly in your yard is this ribbon test. And this is where you get a chunk of soil that needs to be wet or moist, and then you can start making this ribbon. And if it crumbles really quickly, then you have more of a sandy soil, and that's probably going to be our West County residents that have higher sand levels in their yards. And then if you're able to make kind of a between 2.5 and 5 centimeter ribbon, then you have loam soil, or sorry, less than 2.5 you have loam, and then more than that you sort of have a clay loam mixture. So this is a great way of being able to test on the spot what type of soil you have, and we have more resources for this on our website as well. And then once you have an idea of what type of soil you have, and that's helped you inform your plan for amending as well as your plan for what types of plants you'd like to plant, we first recommend doing any kind of big earthworks, like creating those berms and basins if you'd like to have a rain garden, before you start the process of sheet mulching. So sheet mulching is a way of preparing your yard for a bigger landscape overhaul, and it involves first edging And edging is creating a bit of a, like a ditch between any kind of boundary that you have, like cement here or grass here, that creates a great weed barrier and also allows that mulch to fall into that ditch so it doesn't then overflow onto your grassy area or onto your sidewalk here. And then you layer an inch of compost, 2 layers of cardboard, and 3 layers of mulch. We've worked with, if we can go back to that mulch, or sorry, the cardboard page, there you go. We've worked with 2 different types of cardboard. You can get big rolls of cardboard that can be 3 feet, 4 feet, and 6 feet long from Grab and Grow, which is a local Sonoma County company. Or you can also look around in the dumpster and get some really nice recycled cardboard, which is what we're doing here on a smaller site. If you're looking at a really big site, or you want to work really quickly, these rolls of cardboard might be the way to go. But if you're looking at a smaller site or don't mind a little slower pace of work, you can get your cardboard for free. And then spreading mulch, we recommend a good 3-inch mulch layer, maybe more, depending on how the existing weeds, or as Connor likes to put it, advantageous plants that are on your site that you might want to try and smother out. And then planting is that last step there. And you can either plant into your mulch, or you can reverse the order and plant into cardboard and place mulch after. It kind of depends on the process that you'd like to go through. And then when you're thinking about what types of plants that you'd like to plant, one way of focusing your design is on what we like to call these anchoring features. So choosing trees and shrubs that will catch your attention and be the focal point of your garden space. Or looking at, maybe you want to have a sitting space and that's going to be the anchor of your garden. And you'd like to design your garden from the perspective of what it's going to look like as you're sitting gazing out. It's also important to take into consideration other permanent structures like pathways and fences, arches and retaining walls. All of those can help you to decide what the focal point for your garden will be and how you'd like to design from there. So here are a few of our favorite anchoring trees. A lot of people mentioned wanting to add more food into their garden space, and these trees can be a wonderful perennial way of adding some food. We have strawberry tree, which has beautiful, really beautiful, delicious fruits that actually fruit in the wintertime, which is really wonderful to have some fruiting plants in the wintertime. Loquats, we have our citrus up here, and then a beautiful oak for some shade that can be a great anchor in a bigger garden space. And then moving on to a few of our shrubs that we like to use, Ceanothus or California lilac can be a beautiful option that flowers in February. It's one of the earliest bloomers and is really wonderful for native plant or for our native pollinators. And then pineapple guava, not a native, but a really hardy shrub that can be grown up, trained up into a tree like you see in this picture, or can be a good, nice screening shrub. And both the flowers and the fruit are edible and delicious. Next, we have coffeeberry, which is a great option for birds. It's one of the better habitat plants. Birds love to eat these little berries, and it can really provide some nice bulk in your garden. And then toyon, look at those beautiful, beautiful red berries. So all of these plants have a lot of different attributes that they can give to your garden. And then a couple more to consider. Bush anemone, lemonade berry, all those beautiful plants. There's so many great options.
So plant selection, basically the most fun and potentially most overwhelming part of the entire design process, at least in my opinion. There are so many different species we can choose from, and then even within species, countless varieties. We have here a yarrow and a sage, and within just those two alone, there are so many varieties to choose from. So it's good to find ways to narrow down your focus to prevent that overwhelm of kind of like standing in the grocery store looking at 100 different types of cereal, right? So kind of a North Star for me is asking how we can choose plants that have multiple benefits. You might hear this referred to as stacking functions. So in general, if I'm choosing a plant for a design, I'm going to want to choose something that is going to fill at least 2 of these characteristics. I want it to be water-wise, habitat providing, edible, medicinal, and of course, beautiful. So if you can find varieties that meet all those criteria, you're really killing it. So first off, we have water-wise. It seems like most of the folks here today from our chat in the beginning are either from Sonoma County or some of our similar West Coast climatic areas. And so you don't need me to tell you why it's important to have water-wise plants. When we're looking for plants that aren't so thirsty, that aren't going to, jack up our water bills and also draw on our aquifers and our resources in an irresponsible way, some characteristics come up as patterns, right? So if you're looking at the leaves of a plant and they're fuzzy or they're waxy, it's a plant that's a succulent or it has tiny leaves like certain varieties of ceanothus, plants that are only green in the winter season, like some bulbs, you can generally assume that that's a plant that doesn't need a lot of water. For those of us here in California, you may know the ceanothus, Oregon grape, California poppy, not only are they all water-wise, but they're all native plants. They adapted to this climatic region, so they're they adapted to not need large amounts of water throughout the dry season. Which brings us to an important consideration. When you're choosing plants, do you go with the native? Do you go with the non-native? This can be a hot button topic for a lot of people. My rule of thumb is anytime you can go with a native, it's probably going to be your best bet. So you have a need or a function that you're looking to fill in your garden, look to see if there is a native plant that will fit in that niche, right? Because as we mentioned, it's going to be, a plant a species rather, that adapted to whatever that region is, whatever that ecosystem is. So it's adapted to the rainfall patterns, the soils of that region. It co-adapted with other species of flora and fauna, so very likely has mutually beneficial relationships. It might provide food or habitat or be an insectary for pollinators. It may, draw up nutrients from the soil to share with plants around it or keep other plants in check. So many benefits that we can go into. So again, if you can use a native, I definitely recommend going with them. Also, as you can see in these pictures, most of the natives we have to choose from are absolutely beautiful. But sometimes you're not going to find a native that fits the function you're looking for, or maybe you're just not super taken with the options that are available to you. So when you're going for a non-native plant, you're going to want to go for something that's been tested by nurseries or experienced gardeners in your area. And a lot of the plants that have been proven to, I think you'll find that a lot of the plants that have been proven to be successful in your area that didn't evolve there or adapt to it are from climate analogs. So as we've mentioned, we here in Daily Axe are in Sonoma County, which like most of California is described as having a Mediterranean climate. And we get that description because the climate is so similar to the Mediterranean region around the Mediterranean Sea. So we think of plants that we see often here that are from that region, like wine grapes and olives, along with many others. There are other regions that share a similar enough climate to be considered analogs or sister climates. We have the southern and southwestern coast of Australia, where you would find eucalyptus, which are also grown prolifically here in California. And you have this western coast of central Chile. So there are so many options. And a lot of the plants that you see in water-wise landscapes around here are dipping into species from those ecosystems. So here we have two examples of some favorites of mine and some commonly used by daily acts in our landscapes. We have the phlomis, the Jerusalem sage, which I don't know specifically where in the Mediterranean region. I would assume Palestine, Israel area, just by the name, but beautiful habitat, pollinator attracting plant. And as Annie told me recently, I had never tried, the nectar of Jerusalem sage is apparently very delicious. And then, as you can probably guess by the name, we have the Chilean guava from Chile. Admittedly, the picture kind of looks like manzanita. Similarly, the berries are edible. The berries can be eaten raw or cooked, and they're delicious either way. Another great water-wise plant. Just to really drive the point home, you see this native species of oak is host to 537 species of caterpillars, where the ginkgo biloba is host to 4 species of caterpillars. So not only are you going to get the beautiful butterflies of the many different species of caterpillars with this oak, but you're also going to draw in birds that can be beneficial to your landscape as well. So as Andy mentioned earlier, I'm not a big fan of the terms weed or invasive species, but I'm not going to hop up on my soapbox. I call them opportunists, and here are 4 that, especially if you live here in Sonoma County, you will almost certainly recognize. We've got Bermuda grass, Scotch broom that we see on a lot of larger properties and disturbed soils like roadsides, the ice plants that are all over the coast, and the ever-present English ivy. And so, as you may know, some of these plants can choke out native species and really take over your garden without offering a whole lot to the broader ecosystem. You know, we really want to be creating ecological gardens because the co-benefits are almost endless. You're going to have an abundant garden that requires less maintenance, less water. You're going to get more enjoyment out of it. You're going to be drawing in all of these beneficial species, and you won't have to spend quite as much time pulling weeds, because you never know if you introduce a species that's an opportunist, they could have far rippling effects of the kind that we're not really going for. And I'll pass it back to Annie.
When you're thinking about design, I love to consider all the wonderful colors that you can incorporate into your garden. You can choose more analogous garden colors, like this beautiful violet to blue to green scheme that can be very calming, or look at some of those contrast colors like the oranges and yellows paired with the blues and purples. We have some beautiful examples of both of these types of schemes. This scheme right here is just like, calm, with that beautiful array of purples and pinks and blues. And then the next picture here provides a little bit more of a pop that you might be going for, with some gorgeous contrast of that blue wall with the orange irises and that nice purple and yellow combination that you see so often in California wildflowers, with lupin coming up next to some of those yellow wildflowers. So whatever it is that you want to emulate in your garden, you can do a little bit of both. And you can also think about textures too. It's really, in this top left picture, you can see that you have that really tall, kind of frondier, spikier texture with the feathery grass, and then that soft, steppable ground cover that's in between the pavers right there. And in the background, you can also see kind of a softer flowering spike. And so it's really fun to play with this different texture of softness, featheriness. It can also be really fun to think about how you're going to use your garden space and whether or not you want to invite people to pick and smell and crush. And you can do that with some of those sensory plants like lamb's ear that just says, please, please, please touch me. And some of those herbs that you can plant alongside your pathways that might say, hey, come, take a pinch. There's options are really endless here for what you can do combining that creativity of color and texture.
So another factor that you're going to want to consider when you're choosing your plants, in addition to color, texture, and structure, native, non-native, all of these things, is the seasonality of the plants that you're choosing. You know, ideally, when you're working with blooming plants, you want blooms year-round, blooms and fruits, right? For a number of reasons. Number one, obviously, I think it's safe to say we all love flowers. Sorry if I'm wrong with that. But you want to be able to see beauty in the garden year-round. You want to be able to harvest fruits, nuts, and seeds for as long as possible. But beyond our own enjoyment, we want to be able to create habitat and food for our pollinators and our other beneficial species year-round. So you really want to consider, like, if you're planting apples, for example, could you plant a number of varieties of apple trees so that you're having harvest for months and months on end, instead of ending up with, you know, 5 apple trees and a huge bounty of apples all in a small window of time, and you're overwhelmed trying to eat and process them. And, you know, an example that I think of, it's sort of a one-season garden, is when people plant rose gardens without other species with different bloom times incorporated within. Because as much as the next person, I love the beauty of rose blossoms and especially the smell, but they don't last forever, right? We have this window of time where there's bursting abundance, and then for the rest of the year, you know, it's a shrub. So if you can complement that by incorporating plants that are later season bloomers and earlier spring bloomers, you're going to always have something eye-catching in the garden. And again, you're going to be really helping out the other species that share that space with us. So we have just a few examples here of some plants that we at Daily Axe keep coming back to in our garden designs. So we've got some fruit trees here, which are some water-wise species. Serviceberry is a little more of a Pacific Northwest species. So our friend who's joining from Corvallis may have some experience with serviceberry, but ficus and persimmon, whether Fuyu or Harchia, and pomegranate all really thrive in this Sonoma County ecosystem. They have different bloom times. You can get a really beautiful variety of color going on, especially in the fall with the persimmon. Some smaller evergreen shrubs that we love. We've got rosemary, beautiful, can be a culinary herb or medicinal. Similarly, lavender, Jerusalem sage, which we talked about a little bit earlier, and then artichoke, the perennial vegetable, which, you know, creates a delicious vegetable for us to eat, or if we let it go to bloom, has these really wonderful light purple flowers for us. We use a lot of sages, and here are just a few of the common ones that we come back to. As you can tell, autumn sage is a big hit with the hummingbirds. This tricolor culinary sage is a favorite of mine. If you can do anything with sage and butter, I am super on board. And big fan of the blooms of the meadow sage here. Grasses are a really great option for a number of functions. For rain gardens, they're a big habitat plant for many species, including birds. And again, as Annie was saying, good for having a contrasting texture to a lot of the other leaf structures of different species. So here are a few that we use frequently. And when you're making your design, typically we're going to start with the big and work to the small, right? So we have our anchoring features. We've got these big, beautiful trees. We have maybe some dwarf fruit trees and some woody stem perennials, berry bushes, and we're working down, and inevitably there's going to be some gaps in your design. And while it's important to leave some bare soil for like ground bees and birds and other species, there are going to be spaces that you'll want to fill in. You can do that with annual vegetables, which we'll talk about in just a couple minutes, but here are a few species that we like to use as fillers. I know that my picture way back when we were going over zones of my garden was not zoomed in very much, but you may have noticed I have a lot of daisies out in my garden. And I'm a huge fan of penstemon. I use penstemon a lot. I love the sort of trumpet-shaped flowers and the colors you can get from penstemon in these almost year-long blooms. are really magical. And I want to say this one is electric blue. Annie, you may be able to correct me on that. Okay. Yarrow, again, so many varieties of yarrow, great plant. Blue fescue, the soft bluish gray color. Here are some great pollinator attracting ground covers. I do love creeping oregano. California fuchsia is a native. That's a great habitat plant pollinator attractor. We have resources on our website. I know it's probably not super fun to have me just read these cards at you. We have resources on our website with all of these plants and some others that are favorites at Daily Axe that go into details about whether they need full sun, part shade, what their water needs are, and what their attributes and functions are about, with regards to pollinator attraction, if they're edible, if they're medicinal. So I really encourage you to check out those resources on our website and get the detail that each of these species deserves. Of course, it's important to know what plants you can incorporate in the shade. As we've mentioned, a lot of plants prefer full sun. So here are a few options to work with when you have those shady spots in your garden. That, for me, I have a bunch of valley oaks and Oregon white oaks around where I live that cast a pretty big shade canopy. So I do grow a fair amount of woodland strawberries, and I don't have any currants in my garden yet, but I definitely want to work them in. It's good to know that you can grow fruit even in the shade. Yerba buena is a very common plant in our Daily Axe gardens. Which brings us to annual food crops. So this is a really hot topic right now. With the circumstances of the pandemic, a lot of folks are showing interest in growing food in their own gardens, maybe for the first time, which we really love to see at Daily Axe. We think that growing food is one way that we can really be the change that we want to see in the world, right? When we start having this, growing food is more than just literally growing food, right? Having an edible garden is this pathway into a more connected, more enriching life. And it's obviously better for our health and our nutrition as well. There are certain things to consider before jumping into annual food crops. And just like irrigation, this is another topic that we could talk endlessly about. So this will be pretty surface level here, but you want to figure out, first of all, what you want out of growing food. What are your constraints? Do you have space to devote to the type of food production that you're envisioning? Do you have room for garden beds, garden rows, fruit trees, and so on? When you figured out how much you want to grow, you have to consider whether you have the capacity to actually eat all of that, or store or process it, or my favorite, share it with your neighbors. Do you have access to the kind of water that it's going to take? A lot of annuals are thirstier than most of the species we've been talking about today, especially the California natives. And then again, sunlight. There are vegetables that can be grown in the shade, but a good number, especially these beautiful tomatoes we have here, really want a lot of sunlight. So, if you figure out that growing annuals really doesn't make a lot of sense for you, or you can only do it on a small scale, there are other options like joining a CSA, community supported agriculture, with a local farm that, continues to shrink the travel miles of your food to your plate. And generally you're going to see responsible farming practices from the kind of farms that are doing CSAs, but definitely do your research. Do want to call a little attention to a few perennial vegetables, because not a lot of people know about perennial vegetables. I didn't until I started gardening myself. Artichokes, asparagus, tree collards, which are basically a perennial kale that you can harvest year round, and rhubarb are just a couple examples. And I absolutely love rhubarb. So if you've decided to go through with it, you're going to start growing food, good on you, more power to you. Love to see it. There are a few considerations in terms of scale and method. You could have a food forest, like what we can see a snippet of in this top left picture, where you have, your canopy layer of trees, you have some fruit trees, vines, maybe some berry bushes, all the way down to an herb layer and ground cover. And it's that herb layer where we would want to think about working in annual vegetables. So you can have this highly varied and contrasted, beautifully abundant garden and still be growing annual vegetables. On the other hand, if you're looking for high yield, more traditional style, there are ways to work in rows of vegetables alongside more of a water-wise habitat or pollinator-focused garden. As we can see in this picture on the right, you can see all this beautiful wood chip mulch here and some poppies, and then, you know, in the middle ground of the picture, we can see some rows of vegetables, and it looks like quite a bit of straw mulch in there too, which is great, considering that most of these annuals are pretty thirsty. And then the third option is to have raised beds or containers, which are great if you have space constraints. You know, if you want to have this, if you don't have a lot of space to begin with, or if you only want to devote a small amount to producing food, raised beds are a good option. Containers are great for if you have even less space, like a patio or a balcony. But when you use these methods rather than planting in the ground, you're looking at even less water efficiency. So definitely something you want to keep in mind. If you're going to be planting food, it's great to be organizing and designing your plant placement in ways that are strategic. So first of all, you want to put plants that have similar water needs together, which is going to ensure that they're thriving in concert with another, but it also makes your life easier when you go to plan out your irrigation. And so we're not going to talk about irrigation right now because that's yet another topic that has boundless information and methodology to it. We do have on the horizon at Daily Axe a really wonderful irrigation deep dive workshop planned. We're thinking in July, so stay tuned for that. You can definitely join our newsletter if you want to get updates there. But so aside from water needs, there are a lot of other reasons to put certain plants near one another or to keep them apart. People call this companion planting, or there are plant guilds, which are just groups of plants that are known to thrive together. So the classic example, which we have a picture here on the right, is the Three Sisters technique that has been practiced for, you know, since time immemorial by indigenous peoples in what we now call Southwestern America, right? It's the combination of corn, beans, and squash. So you have your corn, which provides a trellis structure for the beans to climb up. The beans fix nitrogen in the soil, and the squash, with their big broad leaves, create sort of a green mulch shade cover to keep the soil cool and help retain water. It's really a beautiful example of mutual aid, which is a term we might have been hearing recently with the pandemic context we find ourselves in. Some characteristics that we want to consider when we're looking at companion planting are species that have nutrient accumulating properties. Maybe they fix nitrogen like the beans do. They provide structure or shade. They are insectaries, meaning that they draw in and host beneficial insects, or they create a mulch, either living like the squash or like a fruit tree you can chop and drop to create a mulch on site. And this picture here on the left, you might recognize this is borage. It's a plant that is found in a lot of gardens because it is an amiable companion, if you will. It grows really well with strawberries in particular, in my experience anyway. There's an old English saying that a garden without borage is like a heart without courage. But be warned, it is a bit of a spreader. So if you aren't okay with borage showing up in maybe some unplanned areas of your garden, it may be best to avoid it altogether. One last note there is that we can really start thinking outside of the box when it comes to food security and having our food come from as near home as possible, either in combination with growing annuals and food crops, or instead of, we can be wildcrafting or foraging. So there's so much food that's already growing in our landscape, and it's kind of a fun way to connect with our ancestral roots as humans, as that sort of hunter-gatherer species, right? But a huge, huge disclaimer, big bold text, is you need to know what you're doing before you get started. There are a lot of things that can cause problems with harvesting wild foods. You need to have a really solid knowledge, not only of the species that you can eat, but an equally robust knowledge of the species that you should not eat. Because sometimes there are lookalikes that can cause potentially dangerous situations. You also need to know how to sustainably harvest things. You know, unlike these commercial gardens, even when responsibly farmed, where we're growing something specifically to be eaten, harvesting it, planting the next crop, and we don't have to worry too much about what the right amount to harvest is, though it's always something good to consider. We really need to tread lightly and only take our fair share when we're harvesting wild foods. So here I have some morel mushrooms that I found, super delicious. You can't grow them in the garden. They can only be found in the wild. They are worth a lot of money at a farmer's market or a store. So I encourage you to cherish them if you find them. And just keep in mind that there is one species of lookalike, the false morel, that is not safe to eat. It's easy to distinguish them by cutting them open. If it's hollow all the way through, it's probably a true morel, but you should not take my word for it. Anytime you're harvesting wild foods, and especially mushrooms, you definitely want to consult an expert. And I found that the people who find themselves in those communities are more than happy to help you start to build that knowledge and enjoy the bounty that our ecosystems have to offer. So here at the bottom, there's some good species you can find around Sonoma County. And I encourage you to start researching and start keeping an eye out for those.
All right. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about some design examples in just a second, how fun it can be to go outside. You can go outside in your backyard if you have a backyard, or just go on walks and see all of the edible things you can eat, like oxalis is that little heart-shaped leaf that sends up a yellow flower that can be really annoying in your garden if you have a lot of it, but has a really delicious tang of vitamin C. And then going on walks and seeing wild broccoli seed or wild radish flowers that can be a really delicious, spicy bite. It's a really fun way of interacting with your environment. But getting back into our intentionally designed environments here, this is a quick sketch of our living learning landscape that's at the Petaluma Library. And you can see this kind of curving pathway that we try to mimic a little bit of nature's softer corners and curves, with a sensory garden, with some native pollinator providing plants, with some herbs in the middle here, and then a rain garden, which is one of my favorite features of this landscape, that collects rain that falls on the roof, guides it down into this area, and supports this whole kind of wetter ecosystem of plants that can tolerate having wet roots. And it's just a really beautiful way of diversifying your landscape and being able to incorporate plants that like a little bit more water and supplementing their water needs with the water that falls from a roof. So whenever you can incorporate a rain garden into your landscape, and rain gardens can be incorporated into many, 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 many different types of landscapes, really regardless of how big they are, we really recommend it. Again, more resources on our website about how to do that, as well as upcoming workshops that talk about gray water and how to incorporate some of those into your garden. Here's a little more detailed garden design of our library building. So that first one you saw was a simpler SketchUp, and then it gets more complex and more complex as you go. Really, if you have an artistic inclination, coming up with these designs can be this work of beautiful art as you're choosing your plant symbols to go through and you're placing each one of them so carefully. And I love showing this design with all of the intricate different types of plant symbols. Just shows how beautiful this work can be. I know it's a little bit hard to see, but you can also check out the key with all of the different plants that are here. And this plant key is a really wonderful way for you to organize your plants. I also, when I design, I like to put the full size, the mature size of those plants in my plant key, so I can remember as I design to give enough space for that mature plant size. It's really, really, really easy to have a hard time imagining that this plant that comes in a 4-inch pot is going to be 6 feet wide when it grows up. And there is a tendency to want to smush plants together so that you have a fuller landscape sooner. So just reminding yourself, this is going to be a 6-foot plant, can really help give you enough space. And that becomes really important later down the line when you're maintaining your landscape, and giving each plant enough space to fully express itself can reduce the amount of pruning that you have to do. And reducing the amount of pruning on a plant not only reduces the amount of waste, of green waste, but it also provides for a healthier plant. This is the blank slate on the left of the library living learning landscape after it's been sheet mulched. And then on the right, you can see after some of the landscaping's been done, it looks like we're doing a little bit of irrigation fixes on this building. And then the next slide will show a little close-up of some of the plants that we have chosen. You can see on the left a little zoomed out view of the plants along the pathway, and on the right zooms into that combination of penstemon, which is that purple flower, and then we have a hot lip sage, and I just love saying that name, hot lip sage, which is the variegated pink and white flower that really, really draws in hummingbirds. It's those salvias, those kind of smaller sages are wonderful for attracting hummingbirds. And then you can get out your watercolors or your colored pencils and really start to work on shading and make this as much of a work of art as you would like to here, designating some of your, again, full size of your plants, which helps you make sure that you're giving yourself enough, that you're giving your plants enough space.
This one just goes to show how far you can take the extent of detail and artistic expression into your design, but keeping in mind that even with that first example that we had that was just kind of conceptual, it still looked really good. It was neat and clean, but comparatively simpler. Like, you can get to your vision without going into this high detail, very beautifully shaded and colored garden design. It's really up to you and whatever you think will set you up for success and help you stick to the goals that you've made while remaining open to changes that may need to be made. And just one more example, more on the artistic side of things. Here we have an example of a transformation that was made actually at our executive director's home. We went from this thirsty monoculture lawn to this beautiful, thriving, abundant landscape, which it's a little bit zoomed out, but there is such a variety of species in there. There are edible plants, medicinal, really nailing that stacking functions concept that we talked about earlier. Sorry. So before we launch into a question and answer, I did want to mention a campaign that we're working on at Daily Axe right now. So as we talked about with the annual food production, people are getting creative and really removing the ideas of barriers and impossibilities with what they can do, not only with their gardens, but also with their lives and culture and society right now. So I would love to, and maybe Annie, you'd like to assist me in talking a little bit about our Be the Change campaign here. But we are rolling out a campaign for the rest of 2020, basically to support you and support our communities in changing our individual actions with the intention of transforming our society as a whole to one that's more connected, more equitable, more abundant, and more climate resilient.
Yeah, so the first leg of our campaign is about growing food and medicine. And we have a lot of resources available on our website. We've all been taking turns making a little how-to video. Liz who's facilitating our Q&A and chat right now, did the first of those videos about how you can do some site prep on your site. And so you should check out Liz's video as she creates hugelkultur beds, as well as some raised garden beds at her site. And then the next video is on seeding, which I made in my kitchen as I'm using these little toilet paper rolls to demonstrate how you can get your seedlings started. And then our next little sneak peek into what's going to be next is going to be on transplanting, and Connor is going to be making a video on transplanting best practices. So it's a fun, playful place where you can get information, watch some videos, and then also sign up to take action. You can sign up to expand your existing garden, or you can sign up to be a community hub where you're then reaching out and providing resources in a safe, socially distant way to your neighbors. So there are a lot of really, really fun options and ways that you can both get information and pledge to be involved. And then we'll move on towards cultivating your inner garden. And that's about that mind-body medicine and ways that you can take care of yourself to grow more self-resiliency in this really challenging time period. And then how you can harness all of that collective action that you have and take civic action. So please do check out the campaign and the videos. And it can be a way where when it's really hard because we're missing those face-to-face interactions and connections that we used to have, sort of like a digital virtual way to try and connect and create abundance and be able to take part in a bigger movement together.
Yeah, it's going to be very fun and exciting to see how all of our individual actions stack up and give us a sense of what people power can look like and the kind of change we can leverage, even in this weird time, as Annie was saying, where we're, asked to be distancing from one another and staying home. And with a transplanting video, you'll have fun watching me getting attacked by mosquitoes as I put some tomato plants into my garden. So yeah, definitely look forward to that. So with that, I think we would love to open it up for questions that y'all have.
I do want to make mention, hello everybody, it's Liz, that I have been answering questions throughout this webinar. And so if you all take a look at the Q&A section, again, below at your screen, and you click the answered section, you can go ahead and review other people's questions and my answers to follow. People had a whole variety of questions, from plant suggestions in shady areas and edibles in shady areas. And there were some questions around fire safer practices. So I'm not sure if you all wanted to take a moment to talk about that. And certainly this is a hot topic, haha. And we're going to be setting more resources that are actually probably more scientific than what we can actually provide right here and right now. But I'll pass it back to Connor and Annie to see if there's anything that you just want to talk about and make mention during this webinar.
I would say that when you're looking at having a fire safer landscape, you're really looking at your maintenance practices. Although there are recommendations for different zones, that first zone being 0 to 5 feet around your house, there is a recommendation that you have almost no plant material in that first zone. And then the 5 to 30 is where you might have a little bit more cared for landscape, and then 30 feet and out, which some people may have access to and some may not, can be some of those taller trees. With that being said though, a lot of creating resilience in your landscape has to do with the way that you care for your landscape. And that means pruning back your grasses in winter time so that the new growth that we see in spring turning into fall is that new bright green growth, and keeping all of your plants well hydrated, pruning back any dead branches, as well as, I love that we have this picture of Greywater Concepts in front of us right now, because keeping your soil really well hydrated can create more resilience in your landscape as well. Connor, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I was just going to bring up keeping the landscape well hydrated and trying to sink and spread and store as much water as you can. I think you hit the nail on the head there.
Nice, thank you. We did have a question about bindweed, asking if there are any solutions there. My initial thought would be the sheet mulch practice, but also tying back to the maintenance. With sheet mulch, it's not a foolproof method. You are likely going to have to continue that maintenance, but it is going to help suffocate those roots and discourage them from coming back. So I would suggest sheet mulching. You could do thicker layers of cardboard, and then again, just really staying on top of pulling those weeds as soon as you get them and ensuring that you get all of those roots.
We also recommend a process called solarization. If you have especially Bermuda grass can be really, really, really challenging to get rid of because its roots can sink 18 inches and deeper into your soil. And so this idea of solarizing is where you spread UV treated plastic over your landscape during the hottest months. And that plastic, if you want to focus on heat, you'll actually use clear plastic instead of black plastic. And that heat will then kill off the roots in the top 6 inches. It's really effective in the top 6 inches, and it gets less and less effective deeper than that. But that's one option for being able to reduce the amount of Bermuda grass or other advantageous plants that are growing that you might want to get rid of first. When you have Bermuda grass, we do recommend looking into something like solarizing first, because in our experience, if you sheet mulch over Bermuda grass, you will have ongoing maintenance that can become quickly overwhelming. And sometimes sheet mulching is not effective if you sheet mulch over really heavy areas of Bermuda grass without first addressing it through either trying to dig it out or do some type of solarization.
Yeah, if I can hop in, when I moved into this home, I also inherited some bindweed myself, which is one of those species that tests I like to call them opportunists rather than weeds. But really, in my personal experience, I sheet mulched paths where they were cropping up with like extra cardboard and heavy mulch, and that helped cut down the problem a lot. But they're still cropping up and trying to suffocate a lot of my plants. And so, unfortunately, maybe someone has better advice than this, but all I can say is with the bindweed, you really just have to stay on top of it and pull it out and make sure you get the root.
And so much of it just comes down to knowing that it's not going to be something you'll get rid of in one season. It's going to be something that will help you interact very intimately with your garden for many seasons to come.
Nice. On the same subject of removing those advantageous plants, we have somebody asking how to get rid of ivy without using toxic sprays. They are near a creek, and I just want to make mention, thank you for not wanting to use toxic sprays. Not only is that incredibly harmful for the creek, the waterways, the environment, yourself, anybody around you, it's also really awful for your soil and any organic matter or nutrients that, I mean, our soil is alive, and so you're literally just poisoning it by using toxic chemicals. One solution that I have tried, and I have not seen weeds return just yet, would be a vinegar solution, vinegar, Epsom salt, and a little bit of dish soap. I can try and find a link and respond to that, to your question. But if anybody else has suggestions for getting rid of ivy.
Yeah, we have a lot of English ivy that is growing up into our trees. It's something that we inherited with our landscape as well. And it's a lot of physical labor, but if you hack away at its roots and are able to just haul it down, that's one way to start. And then making sure that you do disconnect any kind of vines that are crawling up from its roots and then trying to get those roots out is a way to do it. In my experience, getting rid of English ivy is one of the most labor intensive species to try and eradicate because it oftentimes does have thick vines that can be like that large in diameter. So it's almost like you're removing small trees when you're trying to get rid of it, but just that manual labor of cutting down the vines and then trying to get the roots out as well. One thing you should not do, which I've seen done, is weed whack when you have English ivy, because when you do weed whack, you are basically spreading all of these different stems that will then root, and you will have English ivy sprouts coming up all over your garden. So please, whatever you do not weed whack. It will create a very, very ongoing and annoying problem for you.
What discourages gophers?
That is the billion-dollar question, isn't it?
I don't even know if concrete is the right answer.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I mean, this is purely anecdotal, correlative evidence of my own experience, and it's certainly not a cure-all. But I have found that the areas of my garden in which I have euphorbia growing, the gophers don't go after it, and they kind of steer clear of it. I haven't tried incorporating it into other parts of my garden where I do see more gopher and mole activity, but I'm considering it because that's one way to find out if there's actually a relation there, if it's purely chance that they've been leaving it alone. Aside from that, I mean, gopher baskets for your garden beds and especially for your fruit trees are a good deterrent. They're not foolproof. They don't last forever. But I have yet to see or come across any of these like store-bought gopher solutions that I would feel comfortable endorsing, but that's just me.
Claire, if you just do a quick Google for some plant guilds that can help deter gophers, there's a lot of bulbs that are also, you can plant around fruit trees as a natural deterrent. With that being said, that's a deterrent. It certainly is no foolproof method. Gophers can nibble on just about anything and will probably sample things in your garden, regardless of what you do. So trapping is another option. And trapping is not for the faint-hearted, but if you have a huge problem, then you can go for traps that are natural, not using poison, and can help you reduce your gopher population.
There are also wildlife species that discourage gophers. There are some predatory birds that will help you out, but they do it according to their time and temperament. You can't really enlist the owls and the herons to go after the gophers. Some people find that their pets can play a role in deterring gophers. Yeah, good luck.
I like that suggestion, Connor, of maybe creating an ecosystem where heron or owls could thrive. Yeah, that seems like a good one. I'm wondering if you all have any suggestions for where folks can actually purchase some edible plant starters or maybe some fruit trees. What are some of your favorite nurseries?
Yeah, so if you are in Santa Rosa area, Wally Gardens, which is off of Dutton Avenue, they sell starts, and I know that almost every place that sells starts has been running low on them, but they do sell a lot of vegetable starts. And then King's Nursery, which is also in Santa Rosa, sells both natives and starts. And Emarisa has a wholesale option. You do have to be a landscaper or have a business doing landscaping to be able to shop at their wholesale option, but they also have a retail side too, where you can buy mostly native starts. And then in Petaluma, we have Cottage Gardens, and I'm probably gonna miss some in Petaluma. So Liz, if you wanna chime in for Petaluma, and then Connor can take on the West County question.
Yeah, Cottage Gardens is an excellent resource in Petaluma. There are, like Annie mentioned, some other nurseries that if you are an organization or have a license, you can shop there. So Landscapes Unlimited is a fantastic one that does a wholesale nursery. I would also really suggest next door, the Sonoma County Beekeepers Association has a plant sale happening right now. Just started today and goes through the weekend, and they have phenomenal organically grown plants. Something that I often actually forget to recommend is that when you are buying plants from certain nurseries, or maybe you're going to like Friedman's or Home Depot, one of those larger companies, is to ensure that you're getting plants that they have not used neonicotinoids on their plants. That is an insecticide that will actually be really harmful to any pollinators that come, and they will carry it around from maybe hive to hive or plant to plant and end up infecting other insects. So it's neonicotinoids that you want to avoid, or neonics. But Cottage Gardens is a great company, and I do not believe that they use any of those.
And then that's reminding us about Calflora. Thank you, Annette. Calflora is a wonderful nursery and they're in Fulton. And I actually tried to buy plants from them without doing all of my research about 2 weeks ago. And right now they are taking orders, and then you can schedule a time where you can come and pick up your plants. And you do need to make your order about a day and a half advance of when you'd like to come and pick them up. And then there's also Harmony Farm Supply that has a location in Petaluma, and then
I think you got cut off there a little bit on the tail end, but it sounded like you're moving into the Harmony here in West County. I live in Forestville, so Harmony is just south on 116. Big fan of Harmony. They have a pretty good native selection. Right now they have tons of veggie starts, and they have a really great selection of water-wise and shade-tolerant plants, just a really good variety in general. And it seems like they've been doing a pretty good job of keeping up with demand. I know that certain nurseries, I don't know if this is still the case, but a few weeks ago, there were nurseries that were selling out of starts like on a daily basis. And I didn't encounter that at Harmony. They always had enough to go around. Some other options, Occidental Arts and Ecology right now in Occidental is taking online orders for starts, and they have kind of an incredible array of plants that you might not find anywhere else. And they have, you go onto their website or through their Facebook page, OAEC, they have a spreadsheet of all the different plants that they're offering right now, and including ones that they will be offering in the near term future, along with sizes and prices, and they're doing it. This may have changed. I haven't checked in a week or two, but at least the way that they were operating was that they were doing it like drive-in style or drive-through style. You would place your order in advance. You'd go in on, I believe, a Saturday, and you can pick up the plants that you ordered. And it's just an excuse to go see their beautiful site. Another option, actually, Annie, you might be able to speak more about the West County Seed Exchange in Sebastopol.
Yeah, so the West County Seed Exchange was it is an amazing resource, and they were actually packaging up seeds for people that were grown out in their garden. That's all run by volunteers that accepts volunteers every Wednesday. They socially distance and care for this beautiful garden that you can check out and potentially be involved with. But I do believe they are ending their order where you could go online and fill out an order and they would package up seeds for you. And then an update here is that CalFlora is now open for regular business, which is awesome. And then there's Ed Wilson Nursery on D Street in Petaluma, says Jane. So a lot of different places where you all can get the things that you need to get started. And then another mention was that the California Native Plant Society has another native plant sale in October, and fall is a great time to plant your natives, just as the fall rains are coming. And that allows them to get well situated in your landscape so that they're able to grow abundantly, and you'll see some beautiful flowers and kind of more established plants in springtime.
Yeah, that reminded me of one more that is not happening right now because of the shelter-in-place circumstances, but as things continue to open up, I'm hoping will come back into play in sort of between West County and Santa Rosa, I guess. There's the Willowside School, I believe. They have plant sales that they have, plants that they grow on site and that are donated. Many of them are donated by Harmony. They have pretty amazing deals there. They have, it's landscape plants. You're not going to find your like annual starts there, but they have a good selection of natives. A good amount of things that I planted in my garden this year came from there. I was lucky enough to make it in before this context fell upon us. But so keep an eye out for that if you live in this area of either Santa Rosa or West County. I see someone mentioned in the Q&A the Scion Exchange in Santa Rosa, which I'm actually not familiar with.
The Scion Exchange is awesome. It's an event where we have a bunch of different people. The California Rare Fruit Growers might be the ones putting it on, but I could be mistaken. Lisa seems to know about it if you want to correct me, Lisa. But they sell a variety of different grafts that you could put onto your trees so you can grow an abundance and a wide variety of different trees. And I think it might be in January, actually. But that is certainly something to keep an eye out, the California Rare Fruit Growers, as well as the Scion Exchange. And it does occur at the Veterans Hall. Thank you, Winnie, for that.
All right, and with that, we are concluding our time together. We do encourage you all to check out our website for any additional resources. We have hosted 4 or 5 different webinars now that you can access and watch at your convenience on our website. And please do check out in live real time our Greywater Concepts with Consideration and Considerations with Laura Allen on Thursday, May 14th. And sign up for the Be the Change campaign. We'd love for you to be part of it and join this big movement and see where our collective actions can take us. We will be compiling resources to send out to you next week, and we'll also include some of your suggestions that I'm looking at in the comments, because these are just love it, love all the participation, love all the knowledge and the insight that everybody has. And so we'll be sharing that through an email to you all next week. So thank you so much for participating in our webinar. This helps all of us who are sitting in our houses feel a little bit more connected. We're used to these face-to-face exchanges with you all, and the webinars have provided us a unique opportunity to really reach a wider audience, and this really, your participation helps us feel so connected. So thank you for joining our webinar, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Yeah, no way I could have said it better myself. Thank you all so much. Gratitude. And thank you, Annie, for that wonderful closing.
Thank you, everybody. Good luck gardening.
Enjoy the rest of your day. Yay.
People are still here. Well, we can go